Anna, please. Jacob's threatening to leave me. He found the messages. My sister's voice cracked through the phone like shattered glass. 5 years of silence, and this was how she chose to break it. Begging. I stared out my penthouse window at the city I now owned pieces of, rain streaking down like the tears she was probably shedding 3 states away. What messages, Betty? I asked, though we both knew exactly what she meant. The messages I'd been sending her husband for 6 months. The ones that started innocently enough. Condolences when his father died, congratulations on his promotion. The ones that gradually became more frequent, more intimate. The ones where he confessed how miserable his marriage had become. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice sounds familiar, hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something like this. Your support helps me bring you more stories like this one. You know what messages, she whispered. How could you do this to me? After everything. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. After everything? You mean after you stole my fiancé? After you convinced our family I was crazy for making up lies about you two? After you wore my grandmother's ring to your wedding because you thought it looked better on you? Let me take you back to where this really started. Not 5 years ago when I caught them, but 7 years ago when I was still naive enough to believe family meant something. Jacob and I were the couple everyone envied. High school sweethearts who made it through college, who planned a future with the precision of architects designing a cathedral. We had the ring, the venue booked, the dress hanging in my closet like a white satin promise. I was 24, working at a marketing firm downtown, saving every penny for our dream house. Jacob was 26, climbing the ladder at his investment company with the determination of someone who'd grown up with nothing and refused to stay there. We'd been together 6 years, longer than some marriages lasted. Betty was 22, fresh out of college with a degree she'd never use and a sense of entitlement that could fill stadiums. Our parents had always doted on her. The baby, the beauty, the one who could do no wrong even when she clearly could. While I was the responsible one, the achiever, the daughter who made them proud at parent-teacher conferences, Betty was the one they protected, excused, enabled. She'd never had a serious boyfriend, never held a job longer than 3 months, never faced a consequence she couldn't charm her way out of. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs when she started hanging around our apartment more, when she began asking Jacob about his work, when she started wearing outfits that were just a little too revealing for casual visits. But I trusted her. More fool me. I trusted them both. Betty had a pattern, though I didn't recognize it until it was too late. She'd identify something she wanted, a friend's designer bag, a classmate's spot on the cheerleading squad, the lead in the school play, and she'd systematically work to get it. Not through merit or effort, but through manipulation, tears, and playing victim until someone gave her what she wanted to make her stop. Our parents enabled it every time. When she wanted my car for prom because it was newer, they made me give it to her. When she wanted to go to the same college as me, they paid her tuition while I worked 3 jobs to cover mine. When she decided she wanted my childhood bedroom because it had better lighting, they moved all my things to the basement without asking. Anna doesn't mind sharing, became their favorite phrase. Anna's always been so generous. Generous. As if I'd had a choice in any of it. The first red flag with Jacob should have been when she started calling him Jake. I'd never called him that. It was too casual, too familiar. But Betty had a way of creating intimacy through presumption, acting like she belonged in spaces where she hadn't been invited. Jake was telling me about his presentation, she'd say at family dinners, and our parents would beam like she'd accomplished something noteworthy just by listening. Jake thinks I should apply for that marketing position at his company, she'd mention casually, even though she'd never shown interest in marketing before. Jake says I have a natural understanding of finance, she'd add with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at me. Jacob, for his part, seemed flattered by her attention. He'd grown up the middle child in a family that barely noticed him, so Betty's focused interest felt good. When I expressed concern, he brushed it off. She's just being friendly, Anna. She looks up to you, so she's trying to connect with me too. It's sweet. Sweet. If only he'd known what Betty's version of sweet really meant. The night I caught them was supposed to be perfect. Jacob had been working late all week on a major deal, and I'd planned a surprise dinner to celebrate his promotion. I'd left work early, picked up ingredients for his favorite meal, bought wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries. I was humming when I unlocked our apartment door, arms full of shopping bags and heart full of love. The living room was dark, but I could hear voices from the bedroom. Low, intimate voices that made my stomach clench with a dread I couldn't yet name. I set the bags down carefully, my hands suddenly shaking. Maybe he was on a work call. Maybe Betty had stopped by and they were helping her with something. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for why my sister's laugh was coming from my bedroom at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. Maybe. I walked toward our bedroom on feet that felt disconnected from my body. The door was partially open, and what I saw through that crack destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. Betty was wearing my silk robe, the one Jacob had given me for Christmas. She was sitting on our bed, with Jacob's arms around her. But it wasn't comforting or innocent. His hands were in her hair, her face was tilted up toward his, and they were kissing with the desperate intensity of people who'd been denying themselves something they wanted badly. "I can't stop thinking about you," Jacob whispered against her lips, and the words hit me like physical blows. "I know," Betty whispered back. "I've wanted this for so long. I've wanted you since the first time Anna brought you home. 2 years. She'd wanted him for 2 years, watching us, planning, waiting for her moment. She doesn't have to know yet," Jacob said, and that yet, that casual, inevitable yet, told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been going on and where they thought it was heading. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, something that betrayed my presence, because they broke apart and turned toward the door. For a moment, all three of us froze in a tableau that would be burned into my memory forever. Jacob's face went through a sequence of expressions: surprise, guilt, fear, and then something worse, relief. Relief that he didn't have to pretend anymore. Betty's reaction was different. Her eyes met mine with something that wasn't shame or regret. It was triumph. Pure, undiluted triumph. She'd won something she'd been competing for, and the fact that I was devastated only made her victory sweeter. "Anna," Jacob started, pulling away from Betty, but not quickly enough, not far enough. We didn't mean for you to find out." I finished, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "You didn't mean for me to find out that you're having an affair with my sister." "It's not an affair," Betty said, adjusting my robe like she belonged in it. "An affair is when someone's married. You're not married, Anna. You're just dating. Just dating. 6 years, an engagement ring, a wedding planned for 8 months away. Just dating." "We fell in love," Jacob said, and those 4 words completed the demolition of my world. Not, "it just happened." Not, "it was a mistake," but we fell in love. As if it were beautiful. As if it were inevitable. As if it was something to be celebrated instead of something that destroyed everything I'd built my future on. "When?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. They looked at each other, and in that look, I saw months of shared secrets, stolen moments, intimate conversations. I saw a relationship that had been growing in the shadows while I went to work every day, planned our wedding every evening, and trusted them both completely. "It started at your birthday party," Betty said. 3 months ago. We were talking, really talking, and we just connected. My birthday party. The night I'd been so happy, surrounded by everyone I loved, celebrating another year of life with the man I was going to marry. They'd fallen in love at my birthday party. Drop a heart emoji in the comments if you think Betty and Jacob got what they deserved, or a broken heart if you think what happened next was too harsh. I read every single comment. The worst part wasn't Jacob leaving, though that felt like having my future surgically removed without anesthesia. The worst part was what happened when I told our parents. I drove to their house that same night, still in shock, still hoping that somehow they would help me make sense of this. That they would be as outraged as I was, as hurt, as ready to demand answers and accountability. Instead, I found Betty already there, tears streaming down her face, playing the role she'd perfected over 24 years, the victim. "I never meant for this to happen," she was saying to Mom, who was rubbing her back in soothing circles. "I fought it for so long, but love isn't something you can control. You can't help who you fall in love with." Dad looked up when I walked in, his face already set in the expression I knew too well, the one that said Anna was being unreasonable again, Anna was causing drama, Anna needed to be the bigger person. "Before you say anything," he started, "you need to understand that this isn't anyone's fault. Sometimes these things just happen. These things." As if my sister seducing my fiancé was like a natural disaster, unavoidable and blameless. "She was supposed to be in our wedding," I said, my voice small and lost. "She was going to be my maid of honor. And she feels terrible about that," Mom said, still focused on comforting Betty. "But sweetie, if they really love each other, isn't it better that this came out now rather than after you were married?" They were making it sound like they'd done me a favor. Like discovering my sister and fiancé in bed together was actually a kindness. "She stole him," I said, the words feeling strange and childish in my mouth. "You can't steal a person, Anna," Dad said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow child. "Jacob made his choice. Betty made hers. You need to respect that. Respect that." They wanted me to respect my sister stealing my fiancé. "What about respecting me?" I asked. "What about respecting our family? What about respecting the fact that I've been planning a wedding, that I've been in love with him for 6 years?" "Love isn't a competition," Mom said, finally looking at me. "And frankly, Anna, you've always been a little controlling in relationships. Maybe this is a sign that you need to work on yourself." Controlling. Because I'd expected fidelity from my fiancé and basic human decency from my sister, I was controlling. Betty looked up at me then, her tears magically stopping long enough to meet my eyes. In that moment, with our parents' full attention and sympathy, she smiled. Just a little. Just enough for me to see. She'd won. Completely. 2 months later, the invitation arrived in my mailbox like a paper knife to whatever was left of my heart. "Betty Michelle Fuller and Jacob James Logan request your presence at their wedding." The date was exactly 1 month after what should have been our wedding day. Same venue, they'd called and explained that there had been a change in circumstances, and could they please transfer the booking to a different couple? Same flowers, same menu, same band. Betty had simply stepped into the life I'd planned and decided it fit her perfectly. The cruelest detail was the bottom of the invitation. Maid of honor, Anna Fuller. My mother called an hour after I received it. "Betty really wants you there," she said without preamble. "She knows this is hard, but your family. Family forgives. Anna. Family supports each other. She wants me to be her maid of honor," I said, the words feeling like gravel in my throat. "She thought it would be a beautiful symbol of healing. Of your bond as sisters being stronger than any temporary conflict." Temporary conflict. As if she'd borrowed my sweater without asking, not destroyed my life. "I won't do it. Anna, sweetheart, I know you're hurt. But this anger isn't good for you. You need to let it go and move forward. Jacob and Betty are happy, and your resentment is only hurting you." My resentment. As if the problem was my reaction to their betrayal, not the betrayal itself. "She stole my entire wedding," I said. "My venue, my flowers, my menu, my dress." "Your dress." I hadn't meant to mention that part. I discovered it by accident when I went to return the dress to the bridal shop, only to find out that Betty had already been there, had tried it on, and had asked them to alter it to fit her. "She's wearing my dress, Mom. The dress I picked out, that we all went together to choose. She's wearing it to marry the man who was supposed to marry me." The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might finally understand the magnitude of what Betty had done. "Well," Mom said finally, "it is a beautiful dress. And Betty always looked better in white than you did." I didn't go to the wedding. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my empty apartment. Jacob had moved out the week after I caught them, and looked at the pictures our family posted on social media in real time. There was Betty in my dress, holding my bouquet, standing at my altar with my fiancé. There were our relatives, all smiling and celebrating as if this were a normal wedding instead of the final act of a betrayal that had torn our family apart. There was my mother, crying happy tears as she watched her younger daughter marry the man who'd been engaged to her older daughter just 4 months earlier. There was my father, walking Betty down the aisle with the same proud expression he'd practiced walking me down the aisle during our rehearsal dinner planning. And there, in the maid of honor spot I'd refused to fill, was our cousin maid Lena, wearing the dress I'd helped Betty pick out for her role in my wedding. The captions were the worst part. So beautiful. Love wins. Betty looks radiant. They're perfect together. When you know, you know. Congratulations to the happy couple. Not one person mentioned that this was strange. Not one person seemed to remember that Jacob had been mine first, that this was supposed to be my day, that something fundamental and wrong had happened here. Or maybe they remembered and simply didn't care. The honeymoon photos appeared on social media over the next 2 weeks. Bora Bora, the same destination Jacob and I had chosen, the same resort where we'd planned to stay. Betty had simply called and transferred those reservations too. In every photo, she was wearing something that looked familiar. The red bikini I'd bought for the trip but never had a chance to wear. The sundress Jacob had bought me for my birthday. The diamond earrings that had been his Christmas gift to me, which I'd left behind when I moved out because looking at them hurt too much. She wasn't just living my life. She was wearing it, literally and figuratively. The final insult was a photo of her hand holding a tropical drink, my grandmother's engagement ring catching the sunset light. The caption read, "Feeling grateful for this beautiful life and the man who loves me exactly as I am." Exactly as I am. As if Jacob had chosen her for her authentic self, not because she'd systematically seduced him while pretending to be my loving sister. But what destroyed me wasn't the ring or the dress or even the honeymoon. It was the comments on that photo. "You deserve all this happiness, Betty. Finally, someone who appreciates what a catch you are. Jacob is so lucky to have found someone like you. Someone like her. Someone who would betray family for personal gain. Someone who would steal another woman's life and wear it like a costume. Someone who would manipulate a situation until she got exactly what she wanted, regardless of who she destroyed in the process." That was when I realized the truth that would change everything. My family didn't see Betty's behavior as wrong. They saw it as successful. The breaking point came at Sunday dinner, 3 weeks after their honeymoon. I'd been avoiding family gatherings, but Mom had guilted me into coming with promises that it would just be us, and we need to work through this as a family. I should have known better. I walked into my childhood home to find Betty and Jacob already there, sitting in the living room like they belonged. Betty was wearing a new bracelet, something expensive and sparkly that caught the light when she gestured. Jacob was relaxed, comfortable, accepted. "Anna." Betty jumped up like she was genuinely happy to see me, like we were normal sisters who hadn't seen each other in too long. "I'm so glad you came. I have something for you." She handed me a small wrapped box, and everyone watched expectantly as I opened it. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small charm that read, "Big Sister." "I wanted you to know that nothing has changed between us," Betty said, her eyes wide with what looked like sincerity. "You're still my big sister. You're still the person I look up to most in the world." The person she looked up to most in the world. The person whose life she'd wanted so badly she'd taken it piece by piece. "Thank you," I said, because what else could I say with everyone staring at me expectantly? "Put it on," Mom urged. "It's beautiful, Betty. What a thoughtful gift." I put on the necklace, and Betty clapped her hands together like I'd done something wonderful. At dinner, they talked about their honeymoon, their new apartment, the one Jacob and I had put a deposit on, their plans for the future. Jacob mentioned a promotion he was up for, and Dad asked detailed questions about his work. Betty talked about redecorating and maybe getting a dog, and Mom offered to go shopping with her for furniture. They talked about everything except the elephant in the room, that this was supposed to be my life they were discussing. I sat there wearing the big sister necklace, eating my mother's pot roast, listening to my family welcome my replacement with enthusiasm they'd never shown for me and Jacob's relationship. "Anna's been so quiet," Betty said finally, turning to me with concern that looked genuine enough to fool everyone except me. "Are you okay? You seem sad." All eyes turned to me. This was my moment to be gracious, to prove I'd moved on, to show that I supported their happiness. Instead, I took off the necklace and set it on the table. "I can't do this," I said quietly. "Do what, sweetie?" Mom asked. "Pretend this is normal. Pretend I'm okay with this. Pretend that what happened is acceptable because you're all happy with how it turned out." The silence was immediate and uncomfortable. "Anna," Dad said in his warning voice. "No," I said, standing up. "I need to say this. Betty seduced my fiancé. She systematically stole my entire life. My wedding, my venue, my dress, my honeymoon, my future. And all of you have not only accepted it, you've celebrated it. You've made me feel like I'm the problem for being hurt about it." "You are being dramatic," Mom started. "I am being human," I interrupted. "I am reacting like a normal person would react to being betrayed by the people who are supposed to love me most." Betty's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, I thought. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Anna, I'm sorry you're in pain. But love isn't something you can control. Jacob and I didn't plan this. It just happened." "It didn't just happen," I said. "You made it happen. You wore revealing clothes around him. You found excuses to be alone with him. You created intimate conversations and moments. You seduced him deliberately." "That's not," Jacob started. "Yes, it is," I said, looking at him directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "You know it is. You both know exactly what you did and how you did it. The only question is whether you care that it destroyed me." The answer was in their faces. They cared that I was making them uncomfortable with my pain. They didn't care that they'd caused it. I left that night and never went back. Not to Sunday dinner, not to family holidays, not to birthday celebrations or graduations or any of the events that had once structured my life. 2 weeks later, I gave notice at my job, sold everything I owned, and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. I'd been offered a position there months earlier, a better job with better pay that I'd turned down because Jacob and I had a life in Chicago. Now I had no life in Chicago. Nothing left to stay for. The hardest part was how easy it was. Jacob and I had no shared accounts to close, no property to divide. He'd moved out so quickly it was like he'd been planning his exit strategy before I'd even caught them. Betty had never contributed anything to my life that needed extracting. My parents called once while I was packing. "You're overreacting," Mom said. "Running away isn't going to solve anything." "I'm not running away," I told her. "I'm running towards something better." "What about family?" Dad asked on the extension. "What about forgiveness? What about accountability?" I countered. "What about consequences? What about basic human decency?" "Betty made a mistake," Mom said. "She's young. She's learning." A mistake. As if she'd accidentally fallen into bed with my fiancé, accidentally planned a wedding, accidentally stolen my entire future. "When you're ready to admit what really happened," I said, "you have my new number." I hung up before they could respond. This is where the story takes a major turn. If you're wondering how someone rebuilds their life after this kind of betrayal, make sure you're subscribed because the transformation that comes next will shock you. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens when Anna becomes more successful than they ever imagined. Seattle was everything Chicago wasn't: clean, green, full of possibilities and people who didn't know my story. I threw myself into my new job with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The marketing firm was smaller than my previous company but more innovative, more willing to take risks. Within 6 months, I'd landed 3 major clients and earned a reputation as someone who could turn around failing campaigns. Within a year, I'd been promoted. Within 2 years, I was leading my own team. I worked 12-hour days not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because success felt like armor, and I was building mine one achievement at a time. I also learned things about myself that I'd never had the chance to discover while I was busy being the perfect girlfriend, the reliable daughter, the understanding sister. I learned that I was funnier than I'd thought, more confident, more ambitious. I learned that I could make friends easily when I wasn't constantly worried about someone else's needs. I learned that I liked living alone, that I enjoyed my own company, that I didn't need constant validation to feel worthwhile. Most importantly, I learned that the people who had claimed to love me had actually been holding me back. Jacob had always subtly undermined my ambitions, suggesting I was too focused on work when I talked about career goals. My parents had always treated my achievements as less important than Betty's needs. My family had trained me to be small, accommodating, grateful for scraps of attention. Now I was discovering what I could accomplish when no one was asking me to shrink. I met Ross at a conference in Portland, 18 months after I'd left Chicago. He was giving a presentation on digital marketing trends, and I was in the audience taking notes not because I had to, but because he was genuinely brilliant. Afterward, at the networking reception, he approached me. "You asked the best questions in there," he said, extending his hand. "Ross Hobbs. And you are." "Anna Fuller," I said, shaking his hand and noticing how he looked directly at me when I spoke, like what I was saying actually mattered. "Anna Fuller. I know that name. Weren't you behind the campaign that saved Morrison Electronics? I studied that case in business school." The campaign that saved Morrison Electronics. My campaign. My success. My name in business school case studies. "That was me," I said, feeling proud instead of modest for once. "Brilliant work. Absolutely brilliant. Would you like to get coffee sometime and talk about it? I'm working on something similar for a client, and I'd love your perspective." Your perspective. Not, "It would be nice to get to know you," or "You're pretty," or any of the shallow reasons men usually asked me out. He wanted my perspective, my expertise, my mind. Coffee led to dinner. Dinner led to long walks and longer conversations. Ross was everything Jacob hadn't been: intellectually curious, emotionally available, genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. He was also nothing like Jacob physically. Where Jacob had been conventionally handsome in a generic, safe way, Ross was striking, tall and lean with dark hair that curled at the edges and green eyes that lit up when he laughed. He had presence, confidence, the kind of charisma that made people pay attention when he spoke. But the best thing about Ross was how he saw me. Not as someone who needed to be managed or fixed or convinced to be less than I was. He saw me as an equal, a partner, someone worth knowing and learning from. 6 months after we started dating, he moved his consulting business to Seattle to be closer to me. "I can work from anywhere," he said when I protested that it was too big a step. "But I can only be with you from here." 3 years after leaving Chicago, I made partner at my firm. The youngest partner in company history, they announced at the celebration dinner. I stood at the podium, looking out at colleagues who respected me, friends who genuinely liked me, and Ross who looked at me like I'd hung the moon. For the first time since I'd caught Betty and Jacob together, I felt truly happy. My phone had been silent for months. No calls from my parents, no attempts at reconciliation, no family updates. I'd changed my number twice, moved apartments once, and generally made it clear that I was not available for their version of family anymore. But success has a way of traveling, especially in the digital age. The article about my promotion appeared in several industry publications. The photograph showed me in my corner office, professional and confident, with a caption that mentioned my innovative campaigns and my company's record-breaking year. That's when my phone started ringing again. First Mom. "Anna, honey, we saw the article. We're so proud of you. We always knew you were special." Then Dad. "Sweetheart, we've missed you. Why don't you come home for a visit? We have so much to catch up on." Then, surprisingly, Betty. Anna, it's me. I saw your picture in the magazine. You look amazing. Successful. Happy. I miss you. Can we talk? I didn't return any of the calls. I'd learned too much about myself and about them to go backward now. But I did have Ross's private investigator friend run a background check on my family. Not because I was planning to reconnect, but because I wanted to know what desperation had driven them to suddenly remember my existence. The report was illuminating. Year 4 in Seattle, Ross and I started our own consulting firm. Hobbs Fuller Strategic. He'd insisted on putting my name in the company title even though he'd provided most of the startup capital. You're the genius, he'd said when I protested. I'm just the money guy. This company succeeds because of your brain, not my bank account. He wasn't wrong. Within 6 months, we had more clients than we could handle. Within a year, we were turning away business and hiring employees. Within 18 months, we were opening a second office. I specialized in crisis management, taking failing companies and finding ways to turn them around. It turned out that all those years of managing family dysfunction had given me a unique skill set for identifying problems, finding solutions, and implementing change in hostile environments. Ross handled the business development side, using his charm and connections to bring in new clients while I worked my magic behind the scenes. We were partners in every sense of the word: business, personal, intellectual. We challenged each other, supported each other, celebrated each other's successes without competition or resentment. It was everything my relationship with Jacob hadn't been. By our second anniversary, Hobbs Fuller Strategic was pulling in 7 figures annually. By our third, we'd been featured on the cover of Business Weekly as the power couple reshaping corporate America. That's when the investigators' report arrived, and I learned why my family had suddenly started calling. Jacob's investment firm had collapsed 6 months ago. The investigators' report laid it all out in devastating detail. Years of poor decisions, risky investments with client money, and a gambling addiction that had consumed their savings. They'd lost their house, their cars, their carefully curated lifestyle. Betty had been working part-time jobs to keep them afloat, but it wasn't enough. They were drowning in debt, facing bankruptcy, and their marriage was cracking under the pressure. The final nail in their perfect life's coffin was the lawsuit. One of Jacob's former clients was suing him personally for negligent financial advice that had cost them their retirement fund. The settlement would bankrupt them completely. That's why my family had started calling. Not because they missed me or realized they'd been wrong, but because they needed what I had: success, money, stability. They thought enough time had passed that I might be willing to forget the past for the sake of family. They thought I was still the same Anna who used to sacrifice herself to keep everyone else happy. They were wrong. Anna, please. Jacob. Jacob lost everything. The investment firm collapsed, and her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. We're going to lose the house. Our house. Our house. The Victorian mansion she'd insisted on buying with my college fund money. The inheritance she'd convinced our parents to redirect to her after I was cut off for causing drama about her relationship with Jacob. You mean the house you bought with my money? The trust fund Grandma left specifically for me that you convinced Dad to transfer. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear her shallow breathing, the sound of a woman drowning. You knew about that? Oh, Betty. I've known about that for 3 years. Just like I know about the gambling addiction Jacob developed 6 months into your marriage. The one you've been hiding from everyone, including your precious husband. Another sob. This one sounded like something dying. I also know about the debts. The second mortgage you took out without telling him. The credit cards you've maxed out trying to maintain the lifestyle that was supposed to prove you'd won our little competition. How could you possibly know all this? I picked up the investigator's report from my desk. 6 months of detailed surveillance that had cost me more than their monthly mortgage payment. Because unlike you, I learned to plan ahead. I learned to think beyond stealing what belongs to other people. The rain continued its assault on the windows, nature's percussion section for this long-awaited symphony of justice. Remember Ross Hobbs? Jacob mentioned him in our conversations. His old college roommate who'd become such a successful consultant. The one whose business expertise Jacob always envied. Betty's breathing stopped entirely. Ross is my fiancé, Betty. He's also the one who's been advising Jacob on potential job opportunities. The generous consultant who offered to help him get back on his feet after the firm collapsed. I could hear her mind working, putting together the pieces she'd been too desperate to see clearly before. Those job interviews Jacob's been going to? They're all companies Ross and I have relationships with. Companies where a word from us could make or break his application. Jacob thinks he's impressing potential employers with his qualifications. Really, he's been auditioning for my forgiveness. You're lying. Am I? Check his phone, Betty. Look at his recent calls, his email correspondence. See how many of his networking contacts trace back to Hobbs Fuller Strategic. See how many of his promising leads come from people who know exactly who his wife is and what she did to her sister. The silence was complete now. No breathing, no sobbing, nothing but the sound of her world finally crashing down around her. Every door that's opened for Jacob in the past 6 months opened because I allowed it to. Every opportunity he's excited about exists because I created it. I've been pulling the strings of your entire life, and neither of you realized it. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because I wanted you to understand what it felt like to have someone else control your future. To have your happiness dependent on the goodwill of someone you betrayed. To live at the mercy of someone who had every reason to destroy you. But Anna, Betty's voice was small now, childlike. We're family. Family forgives. Family helps each other. Family. I tasted the word like wine that had turned to vinegar. Let me tell you about family, Betty. Family doesn't steal your fiancé 3 months before your wedding. Family doesn't convince your parents that you're the problem when you're hurt by their betrayal. Family doesn't wear your dress to marry your ex-boyfriend and then ask you to celebrate their happiness. I was young, she said desperately. I made mistakes. I've learned. You've learned nothing, I interrupted. You've learned that actions have consequences, but you haven't learned to take responsibility for your actions. Even now, you're calling this a mistake instead of what it was, a calculated campaign to steal my life because you thought it looked better on you than whatever you could build for yourself. Please, Anna, I'll do anything. I'll tell Jacob the truth about everything. I'll confess to Mom and Dad about what really happened. I'll make it right. You can't make it right, Betty. You can't give me back the 5 years I spent rebuilding myself from nothing. You can't give me back the trust one had in family, the innocence I had about love, the security I had in knowing that the people closest to me would protect me instead of destroying me. Then what do you want? The question I'd been waiting for. The moment when she finally understood that I held all the cards now. I want you to understand what I understood that night I caught you with Jacob. That some betrayals are unforgivable. That some damage can't be undone. That some people don't deserve second chances. So you're going to destroy us? Ross and I married 6 months after that phone call, in a ceremony that was everything my first wedding was supposed to be. Intimate, genuine, focused on love instead of performance. My chosen family was there, colleagues who respected me, friends who genuinely cared about my happiness, mentors who'd watched me rise from nothing. I'm not going to destroy you, Betty. I'm going to do what you taught me to do. I'm going to take what I want and let you deal with the consequences. If you think Anna's revenge was justified, drop a fire emoji below. If you think she went too far, let me know with a thumbs down. The ending will surprise you either way, so keep watching to see how this all plays out. Jacob called me 2 hours later, just as I knew he would. Anna. His voice was rough, exhausted. We need to talk. Hello, Jacob. How are Betty and the job search going? You know how they're going. You've known all along. He sighed heavily. She told me everything. About the money, about the messages, about all of it. All of it. That's a lot to confess to in one conversation. She told me about your trust fund. About how she convinced your parents to give it to her. About how she'd been planning to get my attention for months before anything happened between us. I stayed silent, letting him work through it. She also told me that you've been controlling my job prospects. That every opportunity one thought I'd earned was really you deciding whether or not to help me. And how does that make you feel, Jacob? Like an idiot. Like I've been living in a house of cards for 5 years and you just showed me it was all built on lies. The same way I felt when I caught you in our bedroom, I said gently. I know, and Anna, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you, for what we did to you. I'm sorry for letting your family blame you for our choices. I'm sorry for taking the easy way out instead of being honest about what I wanted. An apology. 5 years too late, but still, an apology. I can't forgive you, Jacob. I hope you understand that. I do. I understand that. And I understand why you did this to us. We deserved it. Yes, I said. You did. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you happy? Really happy, not just successful. Are you happy? I looked around my penthouse, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the engagement ring Ross had given me the month before. A ring he designed specifically for me, not inherited or repurposed from someone else's dreams. Yes, I said. I'm happy. Good, he said, and I heard real emotion in his voice for the first time since he'd left me. You deserve to be happy, Anna. You always did. The line went quiet for a moment. What happens now? He asked. Now you figure out how to build a life that isn't based on lies and theft and betrayal. You figure out who you are when you can't rely on other people's foundations. And if we can't, then you learn what I learned, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of. I hung up before he could respond. My biological family was not invited. Hobbs Fuller Strategic went public the following year. Our IPO was oversubscribed by 400%, making us both millionaires several times over. The business magazines called us a power couple redefining success, and they were right. We were successful not despite our partnership, but because of it. Jacob found work eventually, at a small firm in another state. He and Betty divorced 2 years after our confrontation, though they both claimed it was mutual. Betty moved back in with our parents, who supported her through the transition with the same unconditional enabling they'd always provided. I heard through industry contacts that Jacob remarried last year, a woman he met at a grief counseling group, someone who understood loss and rebuilding. I hoped, for both their sakes, that he'd learned to be honest. Betty never remarried. According to Ross's investigator's final report, she becomes something of a cautionary tale in our hometown, the beautiful girl who did everything and lost it all through her own choices. She worked part-time jobs, lived with our aging parents, and had developed a reputation for being bitter about how unfairly life had treated her. Some people never learn. As for me, I kept my promise to myself. I built a life so good that revenge became irrelevant. I loved someone who loved me back completely, honestly, without competition or conditions. I created a business that mattered, that helped other people solve their problems instead of creating them. Most importantly, I learned the difference between being loved and being valued. Jacob had loved me the way you love a comfortable habit, easily, carelessly, until something more exciting came along. My family had loved me the way you love a reliable tool, useful when needed, forgotten when not. Ross loved me the way you love a person, wholly, specifically, with full knowledge of who I was and full appreciation for who I was becoming. That was worth more than any revenge I could have orchestrated. But I won't lie, knowing that Betty spent every day living with the consequences of her choices, knowing that Jacob had to rebuild his entire life from scratch because of his betrayal, knowing that they both understood exactly what they'd lost when they lost me, that was pretty satisfying too. Some stories end with forgiveness. Some end with revenge. This one ended with something better. Justice. The natural, inevitable result of people's choices catching up with them while I built something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd destroyed. I never called my family back. I never reached out to Jacob again. I never offered Betty a lifeline when she was drowning. Instead, I did what they'd never expected from the accommodating, generous Anna they'd taken for granted. I lived well. I lived so well that their struggles became background noise to my happiness. And that, as it turned out, was the sweetest revenge of all. If this story of ultimate justice inspired you, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon for more stories about people who got exactly what they deserved. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the best revenge is simply living your best life. What would you have done in Anna's situation? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories might inspire my next video.